Before we dive into today's episode, just a quick word from the sponsor CWD Pond. Whether or not you're building your new koi pond or you're upgrading your existing setup, these guys have got you covered with sleeper pond kits, pond windows, pressure pipe and all the essentials you need to build a pond. And for Koi Perspective podcast listeners, you can enjoy 5% off using the discount code TKPP5. Check them out, all the links are down in the description below. Let's get into today's episode. Hi and welcome back to the Koi Perspective podcast. I'm delighted to say some of you out there might already know my guest. He's got his own YouTube channel, really popular in the koi world and the carp world, I should say. Ben from BP Milling. How are you, Ben?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
So your background, you manufacture your own like carp foods for like carp lakes and things like that at the moment, don't you?
Yeah, so it's more supplementary diets for a fishing environment, outdoor feeding to supplement the natural ecosystem, really. So not quite so targeted on fish farming or ornamentals as such, but more for sort of a tool for fishery managers.
Yeah, that's really cool. We'll come on to that. How are you doing, Will?
Not so bad. I know I'm a bit quiet, the honour.
Yeah, no, it's nice because you're like a hobbyist yourself, just like me. I think we'll find it interesting to like pick Ben's brain and
just sit and listen and.
Yeah. So in the koi world, we are like thrown. It's kind of like if you're into Japanese fish or you want to raise like big fish. Genuinely, in the koi world, we can spend up to like £15 a kilo on koi foods. It's really, really expensive, and I think generally the way that it works in carp is that we manufacture quite a lot of koi foods in England, and also like there's different methods of doing it, and obviously some things are not going to fit. Like you can't just take like a Japanese koi food and I guess chuck it in a carp lake. They're very different, I guess, recipes for different scenarios. So do you want to tell us like how you got into doing yours and kind of your background before you got professionally into it? I guess.
I studied at Sparsholt, studied fishery management at Sparsholt, and I'm very fortunate that I live on a dairy farm, and my sort of career path was always to go down the route of developing the ponds on the farm and somehow make a living from the land we had. I was very lucky to have here to develop something. So the thing we had was sort of an overgrown pond which was covered in bulrush, completely silted up. We had that dredged. That was dredged years ago when I was probably, before I went to college, I was probably only 12 or 13, I guess. And that was dredged, and we put some carp and some rudd in there, and it was kind of so from a young age I was keeping fish and feeding them in an outdoor environment. And then that kind of, when I noticed that there was a college where you could go and study fishery management, I seen an advert somewhere where there's a college with netting a lake, and I was so intrigued to know what was going on, and found that you could actually study such a thing. So that's what I did. I went to Sparsholt and studied fishery management, and came home and developed the pond further. So dug it out again. At this point, I only had one farm pond, and developed it and sort of dug it out even bigger. With got a contractor in to dig it out. It was only half an acre though, so it's not huge ponds as such. And then I, from coming out of college, obviously I felt like I was qualified to get cracking straight away, and I wanted to be feeding the top spec nutrition I could. I was really keen, wanted to be doing the best job I could to grow these fish, and I was buying sort of the global leading feeds for aquaculture and fed them, and they're accepting it really well, going crazy for it, growing really quickly. But by the end of the summer, everything started to look a little bit rough, a little bit ropey, lots of sores, and you could tell something wasn't quite right. And during my time at Sparsholt, I worked with a fishery consultant who I still work with now, and he suggested that I've been overfeeding them and I've got an issue with ammonia, so water quality issue, and he suggested feeding like a plant-based product, because that's all ever he's ever farmed fish on, and he's only ever used cereals and grains and stuff, and everybody that in his journey, that's all they used to do. So he had a complete faith in cereals, and I wasn't quite convinced at the time, because obviously coming out of college, I'd studied fish nutrition and what was best for fish, and I felt like it didn't really align with what he was saying. So I didn't agree at the start, but where was I? I had no leg to stand on because my fish were pretty ill, quite clearly.
Yeah.
So I went with his advice and started feeding things that were available to me on the farm, like the wheat and what we call a blend on the farm, which is a blend of grains that feed to the cows. And that's quite a palatable mix. So with the nutritionist on the farm, I sort of showed him what I was feeding my fish that was causing the problem. And he tried to meet that spec with grains and what we had available to us. So from there, I had a mix which he suggested would perform at the same level as what I'm feeding them. Well, he didn't have much of a knowledge on monogastric sort of there's fish digestion as such. Mm-hmm. So again, I had to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, but yeah, he formulated the mix. And we had I had a blend, which was a ground bait, if you like. And I went out to see if I could get it pelleted. Obviously, I didn't want to be tipping dust into the pond. So I went and looked at some pellet pressing machinery and ended up buying a machine and pelleted this mix that he'd put together for me and started to feed that to my fish. And yeah, the next year they grew as quickly as they did the previous year. And wow. I've never since had a single issue of water quality. Mm-hmm. And I've been growing fish now that was probably 12, 13 years ago. And like I say, it can't be a coincidence that 1 year that I feed fish meal diets and overfeed them on that fish meal mix, that going to cereal grains, I've never had a water quality issue since.
So why would that be? I mean, is it just different ways of digesting the fish meal versus the plant-based feed?
I'd assume it would. Well, fish meal is obviously used as a fertilizer on grass and stuff anyway, so it's going to be quite high contribution to nitrogen and phosphorus. So I think that had something to do with it. Mm-hmm. But cereals, I feel that anything that's grown from the ground, I feel through evolution, water's been on the earth for billions of years. The ecosystem has evolved to receive and digest plant-based foods. Yeah. And I feel like the ecosystem hasn't really evolved as quickly as we've developed feeds for fish. So I felt like in my head that the theory of evolution with what I was feeding them, it would align more with what that ecosystem has accepted for years before we got involved and commercialized this sector. So, for me, I felt like, birds were crapping out grains and stuff falling off trees. Organic material goes into lakes for as long as time. I felt like, the system would be more adapt to the digesting cereal and plant-based products.
Because a lot of your products, like from watching some of your videos, like enable the actual ecosystem of like a lake to perform as well. Is that right? So
that's a huge part of it, yeah. So the way I produce the pellets, a pelleting press system is essentially just compressing the material that we're putting through, which is there's heat generated there, but I cold press again now. So I'm cold pressing material, which you're not gelatinizing the starches with steam. You're not really messing with it too much. It's generally just pressing the material into a mix. So that I feel is better digested by the environment and having it fast breakdown. So an extruded diet, which is an extruder system, is using a lot more mechanical energy to really knead the meal into a dust, to gelatinize all those starch into a dough, to really gelatinize those starches and cook it at very high temperatures. And that's very mechanically demanding. So you need a lot of power for those machines, and they're a big investment, and they produce expensive foods, but they're very water stable, so they don't break down. Whereas a pressed pellet like I produce breaks down very quickly and essentially produces a carpet of food on the floor, which the fish are going to be grazing over for a lot longer. So I've actually been doing some underwater footage recently and filming to compare how the fish respond to fast breakdown foods compared to extruded feeds that don't break down. So having fish grazing for a lot longer, you're getting that substrate worked a lot harder. They're sucking and blowing the substrate the whole time. So for me, that's really important in getting oxygen into the silt and getting that substrate worked and agitated. So if you can get oxygen into the silt, the aerobic bacteria is able to work deeper into the silt, release the nitrate from the subsoil, and essentially fertilize the environment and have a more thriving ecosystem of algae and daphnia, which is essentially producing the nutrients which we're not putting into the feed. So the feed that I'm producing is a supplementary diet. We don't use vitamins or minerals essentially to supplement that, because I feel like in the natural environment, when you've got a thriving presence of algae and daphnia and plankton, that I feel that they are producing the essential nutrients that the bigger organisms in the ecosystem need. And that's kind of proven by the offspring that at home when I'm feeding my fish at home in a monoculture system, just feeding carp in a pond, rate of reproduction is insane. Like the amount of carp that we have coming through the system every year. And that's all from if they were lacking a certain vitamin or mineral or nutrient that was essential in their diet, then they would either be stunted or deformed. They wouldn't perform like they do. But essentially, that's how my production system works at home. Is I naturally produce fish, let them spawn within the system, and they're fed the same diet as the adult fish. And we don't juvenile fish, first year carp. They'll be as big as any of the most reputable farmers across the country, which are doing it indoors with complete diets and probably doing it a bit more labour intensively with Artemia hatching and feeding fish through systems in a sterile environment like that. So for me, a fast breakdown diet kind of complements the system that I'm trying to create in the food chain and how an aquatic ecosystem should be. Whereas I wouldn't recommend my diet to a koi keeper that's perhaps got a recirculation system, because you're filtering that system artificially to remove and sterilize the water, which is the crucial part for the way I do things.
See, I suppose that's where we differ. Obviously, our environments are very controlled. There's no natural influence at all. Everything's quite clinically clean. So I suppose that's where we have to add them fundamental minerals and additional extras, the way you can obviously achieve it naturally.
Yeah, it's interesting. But even like if you look at like a Japanese mud pond, I think what Ben is saying is like pretty much exactly the same in terms of like I know that like Daphnia and things like that are like that is what fish fry feed on, as well as siblings and things like that when they release the fry out in Japan. And it does make a lot of sense that like we take exactly the same fish and put them in a completely different environment, but we have like different ways of looking at what our environment is. And I think we've just gone so far away from like how actually carp are like farmed and looked after, even down to like I've been using your this is not like a plug or anything like that. I'm not sponsored by BP Milling, but I've been using your Natrapel, the garlic thing. And I've been using it on sinking pellets where it can actually like soak up a little bit, and the fish have responded really well to that. And I've not had as many like parasite outbreaks from it, and it's not on like a fatty feed either. Whereas so it's not like overly fatty or leaving like a slick on the water. That's like a garlic additive. And I think farmers do look at the actual food as for the actual health of the koi as well, whereas we look at the food and just go, how big can we get the koi in like a short space of time? And also like colour as well, like colour additives and things like that. And I guess that's where the cost all comes from, or I don't know if you have any explanation.
Yeah, again, I was kind of, when you said about doing a podcast, I felt like I don't know how much I can offer the koi side of things. For me, like that again with the things like the essential fats and putting fats into the diet, which I don't know if you've ever seen there's something on Netflix which I can't remember what it's called now. It was like to do with the ocean being stripped of the food from the ocean and the damage they're having on the seabeds and stuff. And there's a really good part in there where they bring attention to omega-3 and 6 and your essential fatty acids, which are produced that the fish we eat fish for their omega-3 and 6, whereas the fish are getting their omega-3 and 6 from plankton and single-celled algae in our freshwater environment. So where omega-3 and 6 is coming from is single-celled algae. So the fish are the carriers. Mm-hmm. So in our environment outdoors, I feel like there's not such a demand to put fish oils into our diets because the ecosystem is producing omega-3 and 6 in the algae that it's producing. Whereas obviously, again, in your environment where you're filtering that out, there might be more of a requirement for a higher fat and getting those fats into the fish, where they actually originate from, where the fish get them from in a natural environment is from algae and weed and plant-based stuff. So that's why, again, I think it's so important to keep that system thriving. And algae gets a bit of a bad press in our industry because of the respiratory fluctuations you get of algae, the diurnal rhythm and the blooms that you get. So my advice is always down the route of, try and encourage algae, but having that at a consistent rate, which feeding consistently encourages. So the system is trying to digest the materials you're putting into it. So if you can have a constant feed going in at the start of the system, and you can keep the two systems that are working within the aquatic environment that are breaking down the waste materials, which is an aerobic bacterial process. And then you've got a second system, which you need sunlight energy to absorb the byproducts from the aerobic digestion process. So for me, it's educating fisheries that if you can get this cycle working efficiently, and you actually end up needing to put things in the front end, so food to keep the fish system thriving. So then at the back end of the byproduct of the system, you've got a constant algal bloom, which isn't threatening your oxygen, feeding a constant bloom of Daphnia and copepods that stay at a consistent level. And when you get the consistency right through the system, you get a really fertile environment that actually supplies a lot of the key nutrients to freshwater organisms naturally. So again, that's where my sort of industry differs to yours, where you don't have that. And that's another key thing of the fast breakdown pellets, is that they keep fish feeding. Like, I can go down the feed that I put in today, I can go down there tomorrow afternoon and still see fish over the spot smoking it up and really churning up the spot that I fed today. So if you had a feed that doesn't break down, you're not getting that. They can quite easily destroy that ration within an hour or so. So fast breakdown pellets to me are really key in keeping that system consistently cycling.
And when you say fast breakdown, are you talking about actually after the fish has digested it once, or are you talking about like if it's undigested, like left unfed?
Yeah, well, water stability really. So the feeds will break down within sort of 20 minutes. So they'll produce a carpet of particles. And like I was watching the footage that I filmed just a few days ago of the feed breaking down, and how when fish disturb it, all the particles become suspended. So essentially surrounded by oxygen, dissolved oxygen, that aerobic bacteria are then able to digest them. Even Daphnia and copepods that are feeding on particles and bacteria they've got a food that's bioavailable to them that they can digest and utilize immediately. Whereas a package that's extruded, because our industry is kind of dominated by, say, carp fisheries, which really want to drive growth, and they kind of look at it in a different light to me. Whereas a lot of carp fisheries want to get the biggest pellet possible into the intestine of the carp, because that ultimately means the carp's going to grow, because it's getting the entire ration into its gut nice and quick and efficiently, and it's held in there being digested. Whereas my outlook is completely different. I look at you're not feeding the fish, you're feeding your fishery. You're feeding your environment and the fertility of the environment, and having the whole ecosystem functioning in harmony. And in this environment that I try and promote, you gain confidence in your knowledge of algae and how it's all thriving. A lot of people that want to do the opposite and feed just their carp, they get algal blooms and they're always worrying about what the oxygen's doing today, tomorrow. They're looking at the weather, whereas I don't really worry about that, because it's all a lot more consistent. But it's an uphill battle with my industry, because I'm kind of preaching a message which is quite controversial in our industry. I'm up against people that are very well educated, very well qualified, and kind of what I do, supplying an incomplete diet into an environment and it breaks down. You obviously get quite a bit of pushback from these professionals that are saying, no, you've got to be feeding the top spec diet possible to have the most healthiest fish. And my outlook's completely different, and it's kind of a hate it or love it kind of relationship.
Yeah, I get that. But whenever you do anything new in an industry, I mean, this podcast is fairly new to Koi, and we get it all the time on this podcast, saying because we have different opinions on here all the time, and somebody somewhere is going to think, oh, it's just a load of, this is all way too almost like science. Like, how can we use this in Koi? But I think the way that I think we're just the systems that we have now, like my pond is just so crystal clear that I don't think there's any algae development in my pond. But then whenever you go to, say, Japan, or if you've ever turned your UV off for a certain length of time, when you get green water, it's like a common thing to say, koi, like Japanese koi, look amazing in green water. Like, it does something to the skin. So what you're saying, it does resonate if you try to recreate these natural environments. And some people use montrealite clays and things like that to try and add stuff into the water. But are we almost too far away from with the systems we're running now with rotary drum filters and all these kind of things filtering down to almost micron levels? It's almost too clinical for a carp, and I can't imagine for you to change one of your lakes to that type of environment, it'd just be so crazy, and like the expenditure we go to do these things.
Yeah, like I say, your environments. I think our industry can learn a lot more from yours than what yours can learn from ours, because the filtration side of it and the scientific side of things and how all that all works up when in an artificial environment that you're manipulating is really interesting, certainly to me. And I think a lot of our industry could learn a lot from yours. But yeah, there's things like, we put prairie meal into our high protein mix, which is a 60% maize gluten, and that's a yellow. It's got a natural yellow pigment, and that's thought to bring out the yellows in. And I've certainly seen it in my fish when I first started to make that diet. And I was putting prairie meal in quite heavy into that ration, and they certainly showed a more of a yellow hue to them.
So just to go back to formula, so the bulk of the ingredients in your food is grain. Is that what you mentioned?
Yeah.
Do you use any protein at all, or?
We put soybean in there, and there's field beans and prairie meal, which is sort of carrying the.
No fish meal or insect meal or anything along them lines?
No, I don't use any bone meal at all. Again, I'm less formulation focused and more kind of mechanics of the ecosystem and stuff like that. I don't actually formulate the diets myself. I use a nutritionist that does that for me. That's not my area of expertise at all.
Yeah, that's right.
There's, for me, like I say, it's more focused on how the feed is making the fish behave and how that behaviour is complementing the environment that we're feeding.
See that I differ, because for us as hobbyists, there's so much talk about fish meal and quality of fish meal and protein content, and I think I'd be right in saying sort of grains and stuff like that kind of frowned upon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the pushback I get.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then if the way I sort of look at it, and because I listen to people in my industry which are quite influential, and you think, they know their stuff, and they're kind of telling me that what I'm doing wouldn't work, and it just, but when they say that, I have to remember I've been doing this for 10 years and my fish are growing as fast as, so something's wrong in what they're saying and something's right in what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I have to take everything. It's good, because I think it opens up a lot of opportunities in the industry when you can see people with such an influencing voice that are actually, they're quite clearly not right somewhere, or I'm right in, I don't know. It's something that I've certainly spurred me on to keep going and doing what I'm doing and try and spread my message. But going back to the undigestibility of grains, so fish are obviously, their digestion efficiency is, of cyprinids would be around sort of 26, 27 degrees as they're performing at an optimum. So we're very rarely near that in the UK in an outdoor environment where we're growing fish in a system that we can't manipulate. The fish aren't extracting the whole of the diet that, if we could give them the most potent diet, but they're not necessarily going to perform any better. And actually it comes back to me wanting the system to provide a lot of the nutrient that a lot of people want to put in the feeds. And when we get in an outdoor environment with the ponds we've got here, for example, if the water temperature ever got close to 26 or 27 degrees, I'd be pretty worried about the water quality, because we haven't got filters like you've got to draw out the ammonia and cycle everything and keep it nice and sterile and consistent. In an outdoor environment, we're in the lap of the gods a little bit. So we've got to look after the water quality, and particularly at those temperatures, there's a lot of demand on oxygen. The aerobic bacteria is really working hard and reproducing fast. The algae is going to be blooming and really, everything's going to be very, very active in that environment. And essentially we're backing off the feed, because at those temperatures we're probably in a drought in the UK and we've not got that turnover of water. So it's kind of one of them. I feel like the times when we could probably benefit and get a faster growth rate at 26, 27 degrees, we're actually in survival mode in the outdoor environment where we can't filter the system like you can.
Yeah. And the other thing that we struggle a lot with in koi is like parasites. And I don't know, like I never have found any information on like carp farmers, even after they've done like a harvest or whatever, like how they are dealing with parasites or how they prevent it. And I wonder, is that based on the food you're feeding, or is that something that you're doing, or what medicines are you using for like parasite prevention?
Well, there's two things to that. There's firstly encouraging behaviour that makes it difficult for parasites to thrive. The biggest, most common parasite that we have is Argillus. I don't know about the koi environment, but certainly Argillus is a big one for us, and leech and stuff. But keeping your fish active, like Argillus are water-bound, that they want to transfer from host to host, so you can interfere with that life cycle if you can keep your fish mobile when the lice hops off the fish to lay its eggs or digest the blood that it's drawn from the fish. That's your opportunity to keep your fish moving and make it difficult for that parasite to find another host which it needs to survive. And these parasites are not there to kill your fish. That's not what they want to do. They want to live on your fish and produce another life cycle. So they're not there to kill them, and they're very common. It's more common than not. In fact, it's very rare not to find them. It's just in what volumes that you find Argillus and lice on your fish, particularly through the winter when the fish are automatically slowing down. We're actually trying to encourage them to stay active with foods. The motive through the winter changes from a growth motive to an actual behavioural mobility to try and keep the fish moving around, stop them from laying up. And we do get a little bit of pushback from people that perhaps from looking at an ecological angle, that want to create habitat with snags or refuge for fish and juvenile species, that behaviour of having fish taking refuge around features is actually against what we're trying to do with keeping the fish active and moving around. So our advice is always to really make the environment quite boring for the fish so that they stay active and moving and not sat in any particular layer of water or any feature. So it's making it very, very difficult for those parasites to thrive. And that's how you really get on top of the numbers. And the other one, we started using a garlic extract, like you said, about Natropal. And that's been very, very effective against Argillus. And there's a new strain of Argillus called Argillus mongolianus. Sounds like a Harry Potter spell, but it's just a bigger version of this Argillus, and it's focusing around the gill plates and within the gill cavity of carp, and it's quite a worrying find that's come over here. And a few fisheries have gone down with that. This Natropal has been the only thing that they've found to be effective against it. Now, there's people that use these drainage posts which they put in the water, and so to allow the lice to lay their eggs. They flip them over so the eggs dry out, and that's another way of controlling it. But certainly Natropal is very, very effective against it. I'm not just saying that. And it's a completely natural product. It's from a garlic extract, and it's a remedy which they use garlic in horse feeds for a similar reason, to repel biting insects, and it's exactly the same with in the fish world.
So is it a sole garlic oil, or is there other things in there, or you're not disclosed to say? Or
no, it's a very simple blend of garlic oil is doing the repelling. The allicin in the garlic extract is natural garlic extract, and the allicin compounds, the sulfur containing compounds within the allicin, are permeating the skin membranes, and that's what the lice can't tolerate. That doesn't kill them; it just repels them, and it gives you opportunity to interrupt the life cycle again. Like I say, the same with keeping the fish mobile.
I think we struggle a lot with like gill fluke and skin fluke, like more things that you have to kind of look at on a microscopic level, and when you're doing like a mucus biopsy. But we struggle a lot with that, and I just don't know whether that's due to like stocking density in more like smaller tanks and that kind of stuff. But then when I look at like Japan, I don't seem to see like similar issues. And then a lot of people say, well, is it just because our tap water's so bad? And the Japanese, they use a lot of like potassium permanganate treatments and all these kind of really harsh chemicals that it's become like common. It's become common now to be like chucking a load of chemicals at koi in ponds, and again, I just don't see that in carp. Even after like farming, I just can't. I don't see it.
Go on.
I think my mindset on it with regards to the parasites and our systems is, I think you're providing such a clean environment that is optimal for koi. There's also other things where it's optimal for. So you've not only got an optimal environment for the fish, it's a crystal clear water. They can move from host to host, dense, big stocking levels, so it's quite dense. I think it's just an easy environment for them to thrive.
Yeah, I think parasites as well, they're part of a healthy ecosystem. It shows you've got a mature system, but they're also a good indicator if your fish are stressed, or in environments where perhaps they're overstocked in fisheries. We see like this lice issue I talk about, where they're more common than not to find them, but where you find them in ridiculous loads is when normally on unhealthy fish or in densely populated fisheries, which are again overstocked, or if you've got big dense lily beds of Norfolk reed that fish hold up in during the winter to take refuge from predators, then you'll find them in there, because that's also a breeding ground where the lice are hatching. So that's the other thing, is looking at where the substrate for the parasites are laying, whether that's in an environment which the fish spend a lot of time, makes it easier for them. But again, the pathology side of things is a discussion for somebody more.
Yeah.
It's a whole other industry, really. It's really, the parasites have parasites, and it just blows your mind when you go down there, and that's not something I'm confident in diving into.
So in your recipes for koi foods, do you use any other herb remedies or anything like that in there? Like we do see with like koi foods, like it's common to use some things, like they use like chili powder, like basil, all these like rosemary, thyme, ginger, that kind of stuff. Is that something that it transcends into carp or not?
I've not come across anything as funky as that. There's always stuff brought to me and people telling me I should use this and that, but I think with my line of work and what I do of helping fisheries be the best fishery they can and seeing a healthy route to fishery progression, it's everybody tries to look at these tiny little maybe edges that they can get over somebody else, and they're all looking for this magic ingredient or anything like that. And when you look at their fishery, there's loads of things which they're not doing right, and that's going to turn the dial 90% of the way for them. And these tiny little 1% things that they could do is kind of, that's where they spend their focus on the tiny the tiny little 1% at the end. But my advice is always get the fundamentals right, and if you're still not happy, because when you get them right, things happen really fast. It's such a rewarding thing to run a fishery when you've got everything functioning efficiently and healthily, and things progress really fast. So you'll forget about all the little bits and pieces that make up those last few percents, that people actually spend 100% of their time thinking that's the solution, that's where we need to go. What do you think, Ben, about this? And I'll say the same. Get the usually light and air, open up your fishery to light and air exposure to get the system functioning efficiently. And actually, my advice is often against what anglers want to hear. It's against what fishery managers want to hear, but it's what the ecosystem needs to function. So it's quite boring, my advice, and you get a lot of people they don't like the advice, but you don't have to listen. But it's just how the fishery needs to function and how the elements you need to get these systems working for you. But instead, like you say, people will look for chemicals for treating this, that, and the other, which is another thing. Putting an artificial chemical into an environment which is adapted over hundreds of thousands, millions of years before we got involved. I feel like you're creating problems later down the line by interfering with a natural process that I'm trying to work with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find it very interesting, the koi side of it, and because we get a lot of people in our industry that inherit fish. One of the biggest issues in our industry is the release of koi into the outdoor environment and how that threatens the native fish and the parasites you're introducing. So that's a big area that we need to focus on to get koi keepers to understand that that's not okay.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of a related topic. I remember a fair few years ago now, I was talking to one of the guys at CFAS, and he was commenting on carp and fisheries, and them actually being a potential problem for rivers. And apparently there's a big influx of big carp coming from Europe illegally. Is that still a thing?
There was. You don't hear about it so much nowadays. When I was sort of new to the industry, that was happening a lot. I'd imagine now, I've not heard about that for a long time now. I'd have thought they're pretty well on top of it. We did actually do a job which for the police for something along those lines. I'm not sure how deep I'm allowed to go on that job. Yeah, it was quite an interesting one of fish that had been brought in, and we had to go and catch them, and the police were there, and it was quite a interesting one. That
one. You've got a big fan who recommended me to get in touch with you and to watch your stuff. You've got a big fan in Japan, actually. Which is, yeah. And he says that you resemble a Japanese koi farmer in the way that you talk about things and discussing the mud ponds and stuff like that. And he said, because I've been asking him, like, where do we go? And he says, like, you need to speak to Ben, and the way that he looks at his ponds is the way that the Japanese look at them, and fish behavior and stuff like that. And what he has said, like the future of Japanese koi, the way that they raised carp, and eventually they got a koi that mutated and was blue and red and black, and they got these mutations from a carp in a rice paddy field, and that's how Japanese koi came about. And he says like that potentially now the Japanese have exhausted like all potential mutations of koi, and he thinks like the future of it might be Japanese farmer looking, because in lakes in like France and England there have been occasions where like colourful carp have come out of these lakes, and it can be from koi keepers putting them in, but he believes there are like some mutations happening in France and also England, like natural mutations of carp, and he thinks like the future of it could be to look at mutations in Europe, and the Japanese are perhaps paying attention to finding out these mutations that happen. So, but yeah, one of the other reasons I wanted to get you on is a lot of koi keepers now are paying like literally like 200 odd pound for a 15 kilo sack of koi food, which again in carp I think would put a lot of people out of business doing that for 15 kilograms. And a lot of people are now like moving on to mainly fish meal based diets in carp. But I want to ask you a little bit, like carp feeds, are they for growing koi in length, or are they growing carp in weight? Is there like a preference in carp?
In my industry, or
in your industry, like length or weight, what's more important?
Well, a lot of people, when they look for stock fish, they want to see big shoulders and deep belly, which is because you think if it grows in those proportions, that's going to be a very heavy, potentially record-breaking fish. Actually, when you look at historically some of the biggest fish over here, you're looking for a longer fish, which then sort of slowly starts to build flesh around it. If they're too deep, they're generally quite stunted, and that's usually a sign that they're sort of been fed a lot of fat. Because we have this in our industry where for a fish farmer that they sell the fish, I don't know if it's the same, I wouldn't have thought it is in the ornamental world, but it's pound per pound weight of fish. So for a fish farmer that's selling fish by the weight, then protein's the more expensive nutrient, and overfeeding protein is obviously producing ammonia, so you're polluting the water and you're spending more doing so. Whereas fat is a cheaper nutrient. Any excess fat is essentially stored around the organs and expressed in body weight, which is profit for the fish farmer. So the fish farmer's it's a better business model overfeeding on fat than it is on protein, which the consumer actually likes, because they like to see that these stock fish are coming in real chunky, because they think they're going to grow big and they're going to continue in those proportions. But actually storing that fat around the vital organs is compromising the longevity of the fish, and potentially putting a lot of pressure on the skeletal structure of the fish, so it's probably not going to develop that length that it needs to be a big fish of the future. It'd be interesting to hear some of the fish farmers' views on where they see the industry going now, because there was a fish farm which very famously produced fish which weren't the most pretty things to look at, famously quite ugly, but they grew very quickly, they stored a lot of fat and grew sort of depth and became very heavy fish, and some of the biggest fish in the country now. But because that got a lot of hate at the time because they were ugly, they stopped being produced and more scalier fish came in, and now we kind of have a market which is saturated by scaly fish. And actually people look back at those big fat fish that are dying and are sort of at that age now where they're dying out, that we could do with fish that like that again, because they were a unique sort of looking fish, and they had those characteristics which today we're more breeding for aesthetics than those ugly things of the day that actually now are quite sought after, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, that definitely happens, and it's for overfeeding on fat, and the farmer's not essentially worried about the longevity of the fish, because they normally farm them up to perhaps 8 or 9 years old before they're sold. And then once they're sold, they have a payday, which is essentially the customer's buying a ball of fat rather than a healthy fish, which is going to live on for many years and has the skeletal growth of a big fish and the frame of a big fish for the future. So yeah, it's again, I feel like the way I do things, if I get a fish which is put on, say, £10 in a year, which is colossal growth, which I do get, occasionally you'll get fish that do that, I'm not concerned that because I don't have the guilt that I've fed that fish on an intensively fatty, calorific diet that's going to compromise the growth of it. It's got that big because of it, essentially its environment, and that's me that sells feed, not essentially saying that it's not the feed that's performed, it's the environment, and the feed is actually a part of the environment, that gets it all to function. So I'm not the best salesman of my feed, because I tell people, there's really potent feeds out there that are a lot more on paper, a lot better than mine. But mine, I feel, is creating behaviours in your fishery that are fertilising the environment and helping the environment function efficiently to get the growth. Like I say, £10 in a year is from a healthy environment. So I'm not concerned about that fish, the longevity of that fish. I'm happy because it's not got there through being fed extensive fish oil fatty diets.
I suppose that fetches back to the balance growth discussion, where I was speak to a breeder in Japan. Prior to this, I was never a big fan of growth, although a lot of people tend to be fond of it, especially on the European market, because growth equals growth for koi. I always found it really had a bad effect on skin, like that skin quality would come down, would go down and really yellow. A conversation with a Japanese breeder, and I was asking him like the benefits of balance and growth, and what he said was, although growth is very good for getting body fast, it's bad long term for the fish's health, but balance is the better long term. You will achieve the same end goal, but just taking a bit longer, and in long term it's better.
For Ben, he's talking about two different food formulations there, because Ben might not know.
Oh, yeah.
So
Sorry,
there's like
Ben.
a growth food, which is really, really high protein. It's like the number one food probably in the market, but it tends to send the skin like really yellow because of the amount of protein in it. But then, the Japanese breeder essentially said feeding like a high protein diet does like essentially like decrease the lifespan of a koi and growing the fish, because we're seeing like in Japan now some 1-year-old fish get to like 50 cm. Like it's some of the growth is absolutely phenomenal, but we always look at the fish from we look at them from top down. So like if, say for example, my concern with people switching in the UK, making the switch from like ornamental fish diets to carp diets, is potentially like some of them can be, like you've mentioned about the fat content, could probably result in them having like a big belly, and like proportionately to looking down on a fish, we look at them and they're almost like a torpedo shape, whereas I think a carp in a lake that's fed like a fatty diet is more like circular from top down, just because of the belly shape that they have.
Our industry definitely look at the width and go, "Oh, look at that one," sort of thing. Whereas, what's a good age for a koi in your sector?
We can see them like up to 20 years, something like that.
I once had the conversation that the metabolism of koi, the optimum metabolism is the first 3 years. So like any sort of serious growth is that first, second and third year. And after that, the metabolism halves. So then they grow a lot slower.
Yeah.
Where do you see that, Ben, on like growth?
Well, again, I find in my ponds, if I've got a broodfish pond where I select fish to go to breed naturally, I don't get involved with a lot of hatcheries. If they've got a hatchery system where they're hatching brine shrimp and they're fertilizing eggs manually indoors and using hormones to bring on the fish, and that sort of situation where they are being much more selective with their breeding, obviously that's common knowledge for you lot. I didn't forget that. So whereas I do things naturally outdoors and let fish get on with it. But if the broodfish pond gets weedy, and essentially that's the weed stealing the nutrients out of the pond, the water clarity starts to become much better. So there's not much nutrient available in the pond. The fry generally don't perform very well at all. So for my first year fish, I want a really turbid environment to get the clay, really get the minerals out of the clay and get the substrate really churned up so that it will have a good algal presence, the substrate sharing its nutrients with the environment, the plankton's thriving, it's got plenty of food. And again, it's all about this ecosystem functioning in harmony, and getting those broodfish to really stir that up for the offspring as they hatch. That's when you get the best growth in your first year carp, is when they're essentially overpopulated and the environment's really sort of agitated and you've got pretty turbid water, quite ugly to look at. But the first year carp generally perform 10 times better in an environment like that than they would in a more natural environment with weed, because a weed is obviously creating a habitat for predatory invertebrates that have fry and eggs on the menu. If your eggs are hatching into an environment like that, they're going to be predated upon by predators and vertebrates in the ecosystem, and you've also got a lack of nutrient available in the water column because it's essentially being drawn by the weed that's stealing all that nitrate. So I get more excited about the future of a fish if it's done well in its first year, I don't generally keep fish that are poorly performed in their first year. That probably comes from a background in a dairy industry, obviously being on a dairy farm here. I know that if it was drilled into us that as me and my brother were bringing up the calves on the farm, that you need to get the colostrum into them and within that 6-hour window, as soon as the calf's born, getting the maximum amount of colostrum into that calf straight away, that the trajectory of that animal is tenfold over one that's perhaps been neglected or hasn't got onto the mother and suckled as well. So that it was to do with a protein which was absorbed. It's probably the same throughout all organisms that having that protein window, that window closes over 6 hours. So the earlier you can get the colostrum in and the maximum volume, the better the trajectory that animal has. So that I think I've brought into the aquaculture, that I feel like it could be the same with fry, having the maximum nutrition available in those first few hours, which I think I feel like I can achieve better in an outdoor environment because it's much more consistent. Whereas these hatchery systems, which hatching brine shrimp, but the water actually holds no nutrition because it's a filtered system, so they're relying on that artemia to be of a good quality. That although there's plenty of fantastic fish farmers that do that successfully and the results go against what I'm suggesting here, but I feel a lot more confident letting fish hatch outdoors. If the weather's spot on and we've got a good presence of algae and daphnia, then I'd much rather my fish be hatching outdoors than in a hatchery environment.
Just for curiosity, Ben, what would you class as good growth in terms of length for a 1-year-old koi, 1-year-old carps?
10 inches in the first year is good.
Yeah.
I've had them close to a pound in their first year, but that's going some, to be fair. It does you need everything to align nicely, which this year has been good because we've had a nice spring. You've had the environment maturing from an early. What we don't want is one of those springs where we have a really cold winter and suddenly it's summer. You go from a transition from winter to summer and you miss that spring sort of transition. So some years when you get that, you feel like the environment hasn't really matured enough for the fry to hatch into, which in obviously a hatchery environment, they'd have a better year than me because it's much more controlled. Whereas this spring, in theory, should be a good one because it's warmed up nice and steady. We've had lots of UV energy this summer, so the algae's had plenty of time to mature. The females have had time to mature, and the males were ready. And we were just relying on an early spawning, really, which at home I actually didn't get. I thought they were ready to go for a long time, and they only spawned on the 1st of June this year. So it'd be interesting to see this year whether the season length actually plays a role in the trajectory of that first year, or whether they need a healthier environment, because they've definitely got a prime environment this year, but they've not perhaps got the season length if we don't have a long summer. Obviously we're into June now, they've only just spawned on the 1st of June. Ideally, if I had a year where they spawned late April and they did very well, but it seems to be quite consistent when I look across other fish farmers that the first year fish generally across all fish farmers, they'll either do very well or very poorly. So that makes me believe that it's the weather and the scenario that we have and the temperatures that we get on the year that we have first year fish. So I feel like this year should be a good year for first year carp, yeah. But last year wasn't very good, I didn't think, across the board.
This year's been a bit crazy though, hasn't it? Because it went really hot, then it went really, really cold again. Like we had a cold snap after a heat wave. Did that, because your food is so reliant on like an ecosystem, was that a shake up for you? Or I guess in lakes the temperature fluctuation's a little bit less. But I don't know, like all my plants in my garden this year, they all came out when it was lovely and sunny. And then we went down to like minus at night times again.
Yeah.
Did that shake up your ecosystem?
No, like I say, having everything quite a healthy balance, I feel like I don't get those aggressive, algal blooms and busts that a lot of fisheries get. So there's definitely a challenge with fisheries that take on board my advice with opening up their fisheries. If it's historically been very overgrown, lots of leaf fall going in, lots of silt build up, there's lots of nitrate to be produced, lots of nutrient-rich water, essentially what we call obviously a eutrophic environment. So there's lots to be digested there. So if you took my advice, opened up that fishery to loads of light and air, suddenly the sunlight can get to a very nutrient-rich environment and you're going to get much more aggressive algal blooms because there's lots of food to digest for the system to digest there. So it's kind of I need to make people understand that if you do that, you need to appreciate you've got a lot of material to digest. So you're going to go through a phase where you're going to get quite funky algal blooms because there's lots of food there to be digested. But once you've got through a season or two where they've had a chance to work through it, and there's been less litter going in, then you'll slowly start to get on top of things, and things will level out to a healthier environment like mine. And in fact, my ponds that are very open and exposed to sunlight and wind exposure, I've actually started to fertilise the ponds with horse manure, because I feel like they're functioning so well. There's not enough food feeding the system, because the system's so just chewing through all the nutrients that are thrown at it by the fish and the food, that actually it could do a feed in to keep it at an optimum.
That's interesting. See, in Japan, they seed mud ponds with chicken manure.
Yeah,
and they claim for Daphnia and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm doing it for. It'd be interesting this year, actually, because I wonder if frog spawn have much to do with the success of Daphnia, because now the spawn have sort of hopped out. The Daphnia have been blooming more than I've seen so far this spring. But do you have much? What do you think of frog spawn in your environment?
They hate it. Like they prepare the mud ponds by killing all the frog spawns.
Yeah.
And it's like it ruins the entire season if they have frog spawn.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think they have quite predatory frogs though, and from what I've heard is the tadpoles will wipe out the fry out.
Right.
So I think that's the reason for.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing something about it, and just as an experiment next year, perhaps, just to because I do get quite a few in some of the ponds that I wonder if they are feeding on what I want the fry to be available to the fry when they hatch. So that could be interesting to do that.
But they also, with the bigger carp, would feed off the tadpoles.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. Like at home, I find that if a fish has got an abundance of a single food source, then I find it does get tired of it. And I have seen carp feed on the tadpoles, but they don't. I wouldn't have said they gorge on them. And I'd say that across the board, that when they have an abundance of a single food item, they do kind of get tired of it. Even my feed, if I by the end of the season, I find they show a better response to something different. I don't know if it's the same with the feed items, the food choices you use, but they certainly show more of an enthusiasm to something a bit different.
Well, we're in the age now where if you haven't got an auto feeder, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
We're feeding every 2 hours from say 6 o'clock in the morning till 8 p.m. at night, and feeding it and keeping food through the digestional tract all kind of day long. And even to the point now where we're like, some people are analysing like fish excrement. Like I've heard that, where they're actually, if your fish food is floating, like that's seen as like a really bad sign. Fish excrement's floating, like that's seen as like a really bad sign. Don't know if you've got any, like do you analyse your fish excrement?
No, this is a short answer. We obviously get in the springtime what we call benthos, which is like the silt layer that sort of crusts over in the spring, and as you get a bit of algae developing, it lifts, and a lot of fisheries get that and panic, but it's completely natural, and it's usually the sign of things waking up in the spring.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I kind of feel like we've got two completely different, like completely different mindsets on how like ecosystems should run. I mean, I think koi keepers would have like nightmares about putting like a koi in something that's almost has so many uncontrollables, and because we, like I've just mentioned with the auto feeder, like controlling every hour that passes through the day, everybody wants crystal clear water and all these kind of things to do it, and we're trying to replicate Japanese water, which has pretty much no minerals. It's completely deficient of anything in the water,
right?
Like really low TDS and that kind of stuff. So it's crazy to see like different mindsets. But now I think more than ever, I don't know whether it's like the carp food producers are starting to like see an opportunity, but we're definitely seeing more hobbyists move towards like carp foods and things like that. But I kind of still feel in my gut, in my heart, tells me that they're not quite like you can take one and put one in the other industry. I think what you've talking about your food is completely different to what we look at, but it's not to say that yours is wrong. You've got your different environment, your lakes, a completely different ecosystem to ours. So I wouldn't want anybody to go and buy a sack of your food and expect it to work in our type of environment.
Yeah, I'm very clear with anyone that asks about feeding koi in a recirculation system. I'd say look for an extruded feed or a floating feed. I know my competitors wouldn't be doing the opposite and sending people my way, but no, I'm honest with people, and I don't want them to buy it and then it clogs up their filters, and it's a food for a function, really.
Yeah. But go and check out all Ben's videos. Like, I find, even as just a koi keeper, I'm not into fishing. I'm not into really like angling or anything like that. But I find it fascinating to look at how these different environments, and the videos are really high level production as well. So
Thank you.
go and check them out. And they've got a bit of comedy mixed in there as well. So go and check them out.
Well, one thing I've sort of took, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your simplified your mindset is to feed the environment, don't feed the koi.
100%.
That's briefly what I've sort of took, which is interesting. It's an interesting mindset.
I do think if I turn my UV off, perhaps there's something to be learned from just running green water and letting the sun, because I can see like my pond walls now are like black. Usually they're green, and I don't know what it is this year that sent them black. Rather than having like usually like a green weed, it's gone black, and I have no idea what that is. Maybe it's a different diet that's just not adding enough phosphates. God knows. But yeah, it's crazy. But no, go and check out Ben's stuff. And if you own a carp lake, like, go and check out Ben's food and stuff like that. And the Naturapel liquid, I have used that, and the fish do like it. So if you want to try out like a garlic additive for parasite prevention, especially like coming out of spring, I feel like that could be something really good. There's so many studies to say that garlic is like a natural, what is it, insecticide? So there's loads of studies out there on garlic. Go and check it out. And thanks for Will for coming on and joining me. It's been fun.
No problem. No, I appreciate coming on and listening. No,
a good nerding session.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, no, and thanks Ben for giving up an hour, because I know you're not into like the koi side of it, but I know that people find this fascinating, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm surprised I managed to talk for an hour. I thought I'm not going to be able to give you much on koi, but
no, we're good.
Well, hopefully we get a few carp people your way as well, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that are both hobbies. All right, guys, I'll see you next week on the Koi Perspective podcast. Thanks ever so much for joining us.